Yeah, I think it was like 80,000 tech workers have been laid off this year, but I don't know.
It sounds low, although it depends when, because a lot of it's happened in like the last 2 weeks that it's been announced. So
Yeah,
Oh, I know
I don't
that
know. I can't
Canada's lost
remember.
a lot too. Like we don't obviously have nearly the same tech centers as the United States, but a couple of the big ones in Canada just gutted their employee base. I know that Hootsuite and I think Slack did as well. League as well. League is like a healthcare app thing. I used to use it at an old company, and they slashed a bunch of them.
well, it's
This
just
was as of November 10th. There was 60,000 American tech workers have been laid off.
Yeah, it's
Counting like the November 9th is the most recent update on that number, and that was 11,000 from Meta.
yeah, and because Amazon announced 10,000 already, but they said they're further layoffs in 2023 that they're planning. They just haven't actually done them yet.
Okay.
rough times ahead. And on that note, we'll jump right into it. So today we're going to be covering the Twitter takeover by Musk. That's obviously been all over the news, and we want to take a look at a couple of different things. Basically, the as you just heard on the start here, like the general waters that face the tech industry, mostly in the West, but a little bit globally as well.
I mean, I think China got hit quite a while ago in their tech industry. It's
Yeah,
been a
yeah,
rough look worldwide.
yeah, exactly. And then we'll discuss some other factors as well. But we can launch right into it with Hubbard's. Do you want to carry on the opening discussion about the tech industry and how it's faring?
Well, I think it's like basically tech is coming down the fastest. It went up the fastest. It's also coming down the fastest, and it's kind of almost anticipatory of like further problems in the general economy in 2023. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, a lot of economists and people that follow the market have expect the economy to really start to suffer in 2023, and just there being generalized downturns, especially relating mostly to the interest rate hikes. That was the whole purpose of cranking interest rates over the last 6, 7, 8 months, was to induce lower economic activity to bring down inflation. That's how you do it. And all kind of Western economies have increased their interest rates significantly. And, like even for example, the Bank of England is predicting a massive prolonged recession in 2023. They've just come out and said it. Uh, other other central banks have not been as like upfront, but they are all wanting to bring in at least a mild recession to bring inflation back in line. And obviously, along with that, like when you crank interest rates, debt service goes up, and a lot of these companies have, large debts, just the nature of the businesses. So,
Mm-hmm.
in anticipation of all that, negative economic forecasting, companies, batten down the hatches. They want to, build cash reserves. They want to uh, ensure that they're as lean and efficient as possible going into a recession, so that they don't default or go bankrupt based on terrible financials. And the obviously the tech sector over the last couple of years, especially since the pandemic hit, has been the hottest sector by a mile. And along with the big growth in terms of revenue from advertising and uh, just a lot more online activity because of the pandemic, they stocked up on employees. Like you can go and look at a lot of tech companies. Um, Anyone you can pick, but like for example, Alphabet, Google's parent. I think they since 2017 they more just over doubled their employee headcount. So it's like a 20% annualized uh, growth rate, which for a company that was already that big and that, had that many employees. That's a pretty crazy amount of staff to add in 5 years.
One thing
And
I'd like throw in there is I was reading recently comparing these tech companies to the more traditional conglomerates. And basically the idea was that in recent years, with all the money flooding into the space, especially during COVID, where they were profiting when a lot of traditional businesses were not, it's been more money chasing fewer profits, such that when they deploy capital, like when they spend money, they used to get about a 50% return on that money 5 years ago, and now they're looking at like a 20% return. They have to spend more money to make less money, or more money to make the same amount of money as they used to in terms of profits, and yet their valuations are skyrocketing, so shareholders are wanting more profits, and they're all desperately searching for where to find them and spending tons of money on moonshots. And then they had this big collapse in their actual market cap, which meant a lot of shareholders put the feet over the fire on these CEOs to start cutting back from these mad money chasing schemes and just spending tons of money to chase profits and start actually focusing on their core businesses again more so.
yeah, I think that's in line with like anytime there's a very low interest rate environment, then there's a ton of money going around and it's harder and harder to find good returns. And you start, investing in more and more kind of outlandish things and just putting money in as many things as possible with the hope and expectation that one of them will pay off. And obviously when interest rates get cranked back up, then a lot of those bets start to turn sour because they were predicated on, low interest rates and essentially free money, right? And now money's no longer free. A lot of those bets are bad. And I mean, that goes in line with one of the largest Alphabet investors sent an open letter, and one of his items was basically like cut back on the cut back on headcount, because headcount at this for Google has gone up so dramatically, and cut back on compensation, because compensation, the median salary for a Google employee is almost $300,000 American, and that's like higher than any other tech company in.
And that's median, so they're not including like the CEO and others who would skew it super hard. So that is a pretty intense level.
Well, that's including all their like admin staff and sales staff and all these things that like, like there can be there's some justification, and even the investor admitted like there's some justification in paying your engineers and your key software guys a lot of money because they make the business work. But is it really necessary to have inflated compensation for admin staff? Probably not. And so, yeah, like his main ask for Google was, cut back the staff, cut back the compensation, and cut back on these like risky investments. Like Google has can't remember the acronym, but they have like their far and few between success department that goes for like tries to get like invest in very speculative projects and hit it big, and they've lost $17 billion over the last few years. I think they have like.
Remember when Google bought almost every important robotics company and then did nothing with it and divested from that? That was a strange time.
Well, and like one of those is like one of the big losers in recent years was like Waymo, the self-driving.
Oh yeah,
they've spent a ton of money on that, and it hasn't really paid off. But anyway, the broader context, again, going back to the broader context, is just like tech is, after running red hot for the last 2 years, they're the first ones to cool down as well, because they ramped up way faster than they should have. And so now this is all coming back into layoffs. Alphabet is going to lay off people. Meta's already laid off people. Amazon's laying off people. You can go down the list of pretty much almost every notable tech company, and they're all planning on either freezing hiring or actually cutting staff. And for a lot of them, like Meta, it's the first time ever that they've reduced headcount in their entire history since they went public. so it's like it's a pretty big deal because it's a total reversal of a linear trend that had been taking place in Silicon Valley for the last like 10 to 15 years. And for a lot of these companies as well, like this will be the first like serious economic downturn that they've faced since becoming a large company. Like, yeah, and that's not true for all of them. Obviously, like Google and Amazon were around for 2008, and even some of them for the dot com. But like for say Facebook, since becoming like an established company, they haven't had any economic downturns. So it's uncharted territory for tech, and yeah, it's definitely all of the projections from inside the companies are that they need to definitely trim down on staff.
So actually at Meta, I have some inside information that they just fired the 11,000 employees who refused to use the metaverse. Nothing to do with trimming staff. Zuckerberg's just a tyrant.
Well, he does like retain all the voting shares.
Yeah, he's apparently obsessed with the metaverse, and there's been multiple shareholders who've tried to talk him down, and he won't be talked down. So that's why they've tanked so much in valuation, is shareholders are just giving up on them. They're actually at the point where they could almost be considered a value investment because their PE is so low now.
Yeah, because he has like different class shares, so he like has still a ton of control.
He retains control basically.
And so, if his pet project is something he wants to pursue, then it's going to get pursued. I don't know. So, do we want to? I think like the preamble of going through the kind of generalized downturn in tech and like the layoffs and contraction that a lot of tech companies are going through or anticipating going through in the next few months is just to give a backdrop to like the Twitter situation in general, because obviously Twitter tech company, it's in there with the rest of them, faces the same economic headwinds and the same forecasts of future economic problems, in 2023 when if and when a recession hits.
When you jump into the numbers, some of it starts to look substantially worse than some of its peers. For instance, in terms of employee bloat, they had double the numbers of more than double per revenue that Meta had, and Meta's laying off. So that tells you that Meta's skimming down from less than half of the employees per revenue that Twitter had. So when Twitter cuts half their employees, they're already not as thin as Meta is aiming to be.
Yeah, so I think that's what we were going to look at, is just that, because I think Twitter laying off a substantial number of employees has created, like, in the media, it was like taken as a sign of like end times for the company.
Circling the drain, as CBC said.
And I think if you looked at it if this was 2021 and Twitter was doing that, that might be true. Like that might be a very bad sign for Twitter if they were cutting staff and laying everyone off a year ago when everyone else was hiring. But in the context, like Price was saying, yeah, even axing half their staff, they are getting back to an industry peer level, and those industry peers are also looking to trim down further from there.
Yeah, it's just they're not an outlier, despite the fact that the media narrative is certainly portraying them as such in cutting back staff.
Well, and the other, I guess, in looking at their own like history, part of the media narrative as well is like, if they cut 3/4 of their staff or whatever they're planning on doing, like how can they keep the lights on, essentially? Like, oh no, like things are going to start to fall apart because there just won't be enough people to do the jobs that need to be done for an app to stay online, I guess, is the argument, and like things will stop working. But if you go and look at like Twitter's history, when they had 200 million monthly active users, they were at about 1,000 employees. This was like circa 2012, 2013. And now they've gone up to about 300 million active users. So 50% increase in active users. And yet they've gone up to prior to Musk, they were at 7,500 employees. But the other thing that doesn't get talked about is they had thousands of contractors. They're at around, I think, between employees and contractors, they're at around 12,000 workers total.
Mhm.
So, at least a 10x in their staffing levels for a 50% increase in monthly users. And you'd think there should be like a fairly, if anything, like as your user base grows, you'd actually need less employees per user because the marginal users just like needs less work to be done, right? Because a lot of it's gonna scale.
Yeah, that's the point of tech. It's
network
scalable.
effects.
Yeah, exactly. It's scalable. That's why you can get incredible profits in a tech company if you're doing things
so
right.
the systems that work for 200 million people, you'd assume would work for 300 million people, right? And so it just makes zero sense that you need to actually massively increase the number of employees per user rather than reduce it. Like if anything, a 50% increase in growth of users might translate into something like a 25% increase, expected increase in employee headcount in tech, right? Like that's how it should scale. It should be a smaller increase in employee headcount compared to the user increase if you're running your company in a reasonable lean fashion, just given the way that tech scales. So I think they can keep. I think the main point there is they're probably still at a level that they can keep the lights on. The other, I guess, interesting thing in the media that I've seen is like, well, if they and this is true of other companies. Like a lot of companies are worried when they do layoffs that they might overcut because it can lead to problems. And the narrative in the media that I've seen around Twitter, quote unquote, overcutting, is that like where are they going to find staff if they overcut? Like, the tech sector, like where are they going to get replacement employees? Well, it's like, again, if this was 2021, I think that argument would hold some weight because that was when every company was staffing up on as many people as possible, and you couldn't get a graduate to work with your company unless you promised the moon. And now it's the exact opposite. A lot of companies are postponing interviews till next year. They're on total hiring freezes. They're laying off. So I'm sure there's going to be a few employees, a few tech employees in the employee pool that would be willing to come over to Twitter if they really do need to, hire back some talent after overcutting. Like,
yeah, there was 50 or 60,000 floating around. Like you might be able to attract a couple.
Yeah. And if you need to replace some with better ones, like there's going to be some better ones. Like an additional 60,000 people in the pool is like.
Well, and Twitter was already a relatively small headcount employer in
if
the
it were
tech
Google,
fields.
they needed to add 18,000, then it'd be a different story.
Yeah, so
probably a couple hundred they'd have to bring back in, would be my guess. If they overcut a bit too much, be maybe a maximum of like, who knows, right? But like probably 1,000.
Well, like, yeah, Meta's laying off more people than Twitter employs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like there is a huge surplus on the market now looking for work.
So I think in this environment, it actually, again, overcutting is not that big of a deal in this current job environment. I think for employers, like that just shouldn't be nearly as concerning for them. I think that kind of like brings us to the conundrum, or the main topic is just like, at least everywhere I've looked, the media coverage of Twitter has been, like, I would say borderline hysterical and very negative, like towards Musk. Like again, the reaction
I found was very, even from like quote unquote like reputable sources, all the language was loaded to make it like they want like every article that I read except for one article from Times of India. So I'm talking CNN, Atlantic, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes. It was all loaded to make you think Musk is basically a moron for doing what he's doing, and he's like it's actually it poses a threat to the security of the nation. Like that was a no joke. That was stuff I had dredged up like from like places like Forbes. Like the slant was very clear.
Well,
and
yeah,
also it's never in the same article. Like you can certainly find articles on the tech layoffs, but it's always as though Twitter is doing something exceptional when they're writing about Twitter. It's like, oh, they just laid off half their employees. It's like, well, how many was that? Oh, 3,000, 4,000. It's like, well, Meta just laid off 11,000. Like, but no, it's just Twitter in a vacuum. Even some of the more right-wing legacy media, it definitely looks like, oh, Musk said this, but his random employee who has no access to the information contradicted him. Therefore, there's quite the question whether Musk is actually telling the truth here.
Yes, I noticed that a lot too. A favorite thing to do was to either quote Twitter users, like random Twitter users, or employees who requested anonymity, but they wouldn't even list the position. It could have been like could have been a chef who was let go because the lunch program got cut or something like that, or a janitor.
It's on the lunch program.
What's that?
I've got the stats on the lunch program. Only $13 million a year. The lunch program was estimated by Musk to cost $400 per meal, doing the basic math of how many meals were eaten divided by $13 million a year to run the program. But one of the chefs that was let go from the program said they only spent $25 to make a meal, which I'm almost certain just meant that's what the ingredients cost and was not taking into account the overhead or the staff.
And if you're spending $25 on ingredients per meal, you're fucking terrible at your job as a cook or as a procurer of the ingredients, because that's ridiculous.
well,
Idea about that stuff because they could be eaten real well, and I'm sure they were.
Yeah,
But the fact that there were more people employed in the kitchen than they had eating the food was basically all you needed to know about how efficiently that program was run.
well, yeah. Most of your staff work from home, and yet you're still running a program to fully.
And that's where it does make some sense why this program existed in such a obviously terrible fashion, as it probably predated the work from home. And if you had 10 times the people using it, and you're looking at maybe $40 per meal as your all-in cost, is much more reasonable than $400 per meal.
Some
It
people
must
would
say 10% of the employees utilized the free meal program. So yeah, about 10x should have been using it when the math made sense.
some would say that you should maybe cut back if only 10% of your employees are utilizing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like bringing it back to just like the media portrayal again, like it's been, yeah, again, borderline hysteric, and the general thrust of it is like all this points to Musk, all his decisions and have been disastrous and terrible, and all of it points to him basically running the business into the ground, and it's going to go bankrupt in the next, weeks or months. Because
weeks. Everything's always going to be in 2 weeks.
yeah, and so without bringing in the greater context of the tech industry itself, obviously, which is, then clearly if Twitter is in such peril, then maybe Meta is, and maybe Amazon is, if they're doing the same thing. But that's never mentioned. And I guess we were trying to then think of or look at why Twitter's getting this Twitter and Musk in particular are getting this treatment of hysterical, media figures just freaking out about how awful it is and how poorly run it is and how bad the decisions are and all this stuff. And I think clearly the main thing that most people noticed, and a lot of people have been theorizing going into the acquisition, is that Musk would make things. His whole pledge was to make things, more pro free speech, and the implicit result of that was going to be essentially conservative and, I'd say, like, anti-establishment narratives becoming more acceptable on the platform, right?
I think the mainstream article I found that most supported this sort of why Musk is being singled out was an interview with an advertising executive. And he basically talked about how Musk has blown up Twitter's relationship with advertisers. And him being an advertiser executive thinks this is all very negative. But even with this obvious slant on it that you can see as pro-advertiser, it becomes quite clear that the system for advertising for Twitter was basically to have your chief customer officer and their employees schmooze the advertisers and convince them to put their millions or billions of dollars from their companies into Twitter to advertise on Twitter, when maybe the logic didn't even make sense to advertise on Twitter. And that's how the advertising business works, I guess. And this is his words, is that Musk fired people who were friends with the advertisers and their job was to suck up to the advertisers and convince them to invest in Twitter, whether or not it made financial sense for the advertisers. Where Musk obviously is not a fan of advertising. He's never advertised Twitter. And what he wants is advertisement as content. That's how he's described it in his open letter to advertisers. He wants to be able to show people ads that will actually apply to their life, show them medications they didn't know existed or products that they'll actually buy, where a lot of advertising is really still just a shot in the dark bird shot that affects maybe a small percentage of the people who see it. And advertisers don't like to be told that they aren't doing things the right way, and their favorite buddy at Twitter is no longer there and employed. And it's an easy look right now for PR to suspend advertising on Twitter. And in the same climate as advertising companies being tech companies that also need to cut back on costs, Twitter's an easy cost to cut.
That's rather interesting, though, because a lot of advertising is targeted nowadays.
Not as targeted as Musk wants it to be. He made that pretty clear. Like,
so he is saying that he believes it to be like not nearly.
No, he didn't say the advertising right now is bad, but he said he wants a type of advertising that's more of a type of content. Like, it's not that, he didn't come out and just attack them, because even Musk isn't quite that bad at reading the room. But he wants advertising that positively affects people's lives, which is just that's just not the move.
Yeah, because I would say most advertising, it's just never going to positively affect people's lives.
Like he said, low relevancy ads are spam, but high relevant ads are actual content. Medical treatment you never knew existed, but is right for you, or a service or product is similar. It's like, I don't know. I've used Twitter a little bit, and I've never seen a good ad on there. I haven't seen good ads in a long time, though. I think there was some crackdown on data privacy laws or something.
I just haven't seen ads in a long time because I use ad
blocks.
I'm not a mongoloid.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I used to opt into all the advertising things so that I could see things that were better targeted for me, and it's been a long time since I bought something based on an ad.
I have never once bought something based on an ad, like, directly.
You think that, but
yeah, that's why
they
I say directly.
They also
all
brainwashed you. They brainwashed you to think that you didn't buy it because of their advertising. It's all part of the plan.
Well, to pick up on your point, Price, I do think that Musk has kind of put himself into a bit of a tight spot with Twitter. That was one thing that people were pointing out in the legacy media articles that actually I felt had some weight to it, that 90% of Twitter's revenue comes from advertising, and if they lose that, they could be in, or if they lose a substantial amount of that, they could be in some serious trouble financially, given the fact that they have quite a bit of loans, and the service costs on those loans are going up as interest rates increase. So alienating your advertisers, it's, at least in the short term, that could cause some serious problems. Now, whether or not it's going to cause them to collapse, I think that's absolutely undeterminable at the moment. But though the legacy media seems to really think that that's where it's going to go, but it does seem to be an issue.
Seems very fair, as Musk doesn't understand advertising or advertisers' concerns, and so doesn't take them seriously, which sounds fairly accurate given on how the advertisers have responded to Musk's attempts to work with them.
I think like advertising excluded, like it is interesting, but I think that doesn't really explain the media reaction at all. Like,
no,
the advertisers are a separate entity, right? Like and I hardly think that the media is going to bat for the advertisers.
That's not something I ever saw in any of the.
I don't think the media gives a single shit if Musk alienates every advertiser on the planet. I think the media's problem with Musk, and the reason that they are, so negative on his takeover, is the media's general political slant, and also I think they had managed to kind of wrestle back control of the gatekeeping, the information distribution gatekeeping function that they had been serving prior to the rise of the internet, by controlling the distributors of internet content, right? Like, I think, we saw coming out of like the COVID pandemic stuff with Facebook colluding with the U.S. government on, COVID, quote unquote, misinformation and all this shit, that they had got, like, the government and the media and other kind of power players had gotten together and basically said, okay, on these social media platforms, there's going to be acceptable content that, we determine is acceptable, and there's going to be unacceptable content, and we're going to determine what isn't acceptable, and then we're just going to all collude together to keep unacceptable stuff off all of the platforms. And they had that, like Facebook, like it, even getting rid of Donald Trump, right? Like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of them killed Donald Trump at the same time. It's like,
yeah,
it's
no
not
collusion
a coincidence.
there.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Like anyone with a brain can figure out that they are all in cahoots with each other, and that they've decided to work together on picking and choosing which information fits the proper narrative and which doesn't, and they will work together to get anything they don't like off of their websites. And I think that's why the media and people in this space are so mad about the Musk takeover, is that he represents a loss of control over that mechanism. Because if he stops colluding with everyone else and starts allowing a wider range of voices, even if he doesn't allow everything, right? Even if he just decides to put people back on that had otherwise been excluded, and he still keeps some people off, then that'll really screw over the stranglehold on the narrative, because everyone will flock to Twitter to hear what these alternative voices have to say about whatever given topic of the day is, and they won't be able to eliminate those counter narratives, because there'll be one platform. That's all that really needs to be true. There needs to be one platform, and I think the size of the platform matters, right? Because you could say,
there are plenty of platforms that carry all of this stuff, but nobody knows about them virtually.
Well, no, they're tiny, right? Like, and
Odyssey,
you can see
Rumble, Truth Social. Not that that's a good alternative to anything, but yeah, they're out there.
Parler, right? Like,
Yeah, Parler.
but even Parler was getting a little bit of traction, and then Trump decided to move over there. I think it was Trump, right? Trump decided to move over there, and then Amazon killed their hosting, their AWS, and Apple and Google pulled Parler off the respective app stores. So
Yeah, until they got back on, like until they got back in line, basically. And then I think it was all the January 6th shit
yeah,
that
so they
caused it.
they basically killed Parler in terms of like their growth and their prevalence because Parler wasn't playing ball, right? And so you can say, "Oh, create your own social media platform." Well, you can't when Amazon owns the like Amazon, Microsoft, and a few other companies own like 90% of the hosting on the
Yeah,
planet.
yeah, exactly.
Where are you going to get hosting services to support a large scale social media network?
You have
There's
to
no
build it
other
all
alternative.
yourself, and that's extremely difficult.
It's like just come up with a meager $250 billion, and then you can build your own social media platform, right? Uh, so again, like I think this is why like the Twitter issue is so important for them is because now Musk gets to decide basically whether or not he follows along, plays ball or not, and
Yeah, and
that's
I think it becomes an extremely difficult thing to say, thing to do by Google and Apple to just shut down, like take Twitter off and just, axe it and say, well, you better get back in line. I think that might be a bridge too far for them to force the narrative back, like force the Overton window back to what they want it to be. It's just that look, I think, would really shock quite a few, like just the general public. Like, oh, you're removing all of Twitter, even though like nothing truly crazy has happened on Twitter. Like, it's not like barring some sort of unbelievable, true black swan event precipitated by Twitter. I think a lot of people would look at that and say, okay, there's something really bizarre going on. Like, we're going to demand action by the government to look into this. Like, you guys are all colluding to have it removed from like a regular app that a lot of us use. You're having it removed from the app store. Like, no, like we're not going to put up with this. You never know. They could get it done, but I just think it just makes that Parler, 90% of people don't give a shit about that, so they're not going to say anything. But Twitter, I think quite a few people that would raise enough eyebrows where the blowback might be intense enough to cause some serious repercussions for the companies that attempt it.
Well, they're already attempting it. They're just doing it in subtle ways because exactly what you said. The backlash would be so dramatic if they just pulled Twitter off of, say, the App Store and all that. I think the backlash would be just huge and it would be obvious. But you already hear rumblings about getting them investigated. Twitter investigated for having ties. Some of the investors are Saudi, and so they're
interesting. I actually have something on that because I came across that. There's one senator, Chris Murphy from the States. He's going nuts over it, saying that like the Saudi and Qatar investments into Twitter are extremely dangerous and constitute a national security risk. He is consistent in the sense that he does also think China's ties to TikTok are a pretty grave concern. But I did find it very interesting that I couldn't find any mention of the Saudi investment because it's
Saudis didn't invest in a straightforward sense. They just rolled over their existing shares, so Musk didn't have to buy their shares.
Yes, but like, what's his name? Bin Talal. He's one of the princes of Saudi Arabia. He's held a decent chunk of Twitter since at least 2015, and you haven't seen Senator Chris Murphy or some of these other guys jumping up and down to have Twitter investigated and basically seen as like a national security risk until now. So I found that to be pretty telling, where it's all of a sudden now it's a big problem. And my thoughts on that was it's basically exactly like you were saying, Hubbard's. It's the underhanded way of trying to get Twitter, the Musk's leadership of Twitter, removed, basically, like pulling him out from that, not allowing him to do it, or having regulatory control over it, so that they can do whatever they want to do and push the narrative back.
They don't even need Twitter to necessarily fail. They just need to threaten Musk enough that he falls in line with the same, control mechanisms that, he keeps the same control mechanisms that were in place before, right? Like as long as he acquiesces and agrees to, use, push down inconvenient stories in the algorithm, et cetera, or remove certain topics that are, misinformation, whatever. You can't put talk about ivermectin or whatever. As long as he does all those things, I'm sure they wouldn't care that much.
Have him removed.
Yeah,
they wouldn't attempt that. They would just be like, oh, well, we got what we wanted. On to the next thing.
It's actually a good point, and one of the things that I saw raised that makes a person genuinely think about it is that now that Musk is effectively the sole owner of Twitter, with a couple people in for a few billion here and there, that it has turned into a situation where pressuring Musk directly, however you can manage to do it, can affect the results for all of Twitter just by pressuring one person, which is one of the concerns that was raised by people that I think had more genuine concern over its private ownership.
Yeah, that is a fair point.
Because it could go both ways. Like, as you're saying, it could be that the existing tech sphere pressures Musk into doing something that he wouldn't have initially done with the right leverage, or it could go the other way with some strange leverage involving another company. Even Tesla was the one that was spouted. Like, if somebody wanted to sell a bunch of Tesla shares unless Musk did X or Y.
Yeah, well, I think Bezos brought that up, saying like, "Oh, I wonder how much China will have an influence in the town square now." Basically saying like, because Musk wants to really sell a bunch of like China is like the main, I think, marketplace.
It's got the Tesla. Shanghai mega factory.
Yeah, exactly. So, which I thought was absolutely hilarious.
Huge market and manufacturer for Tesla product. Yeah, I think that's like that's the legitimate concern. I think if you were to look at the Musk takeover, is the China connection, right? It's like, okay, Musk has a lot of conflicting interest with China because, again, huge production of not just his vehicles, but also tons and tons of his component parts that are manufactured in other places come out of China. Like battery manufacturing in general is massively concentrated in China. Therefore, will that affect his leadership on something like Twitter in terms of what's allowed to be said about China?
I do find it very rich like that comment coming from Bezos, given that his entire company is founded on the Chinese manufacturing base. It's like, people in glass houses shouldn't cast stones there, buddy.
Well, I think that brings like more weight to like, I haven't seen a single thing about that in the mainstream media. Like nobody talks about like, oh, what if China starts exerting influence on Twitter? None of that's
The Economist, and that was it. I don't know if it quite counts as mainstream.
And not like I think because it's not a genuine concern over free speech or conflict of interest or any of the or political like machinations or whatever. It's they don't care about any of that. They only care that Musk might poke a hole in the control grip that they have. Bubble. Yeah, and then let it all out, and then all of a sudden they're because I think they had like the I don't know if it sounds too conspiratorial, but like establishment crew that holds power, like your typical Washington elite. I think they felt like they were finally like scrabbling back the control that they had lost during the Trump era, right? Because Trump was a complete fucking wild cannon that was not controllable, and that was like very concerning for, you know, uh, that type of person. Well, I think any normal person had some concerns about the wild cannon factor there, but again, like that was a very like precarious and dangerous time for them, and I think they'd finally like figured out, okay, well, like we get all of these distribution websites in line with us, we get them to uh, censor the things that we need and want censored, and then we're back to the good old days where we control the narrative, back in the pre-internet era where what was and wasn't allowed to be on TV and in print media and stuff was all a big network of,
This is an old boys club, right? Basically.
Yeah, and I think again, you don't need to like resort to some like grand conspiracy of whatever. You just need to assume that people who are in positions of power hang out together, eat together, talk together.
Those are their colleagues, their coworkers. Like,
yeah, and
you sit around and talk to your coworkers all day long, like just the average person, right? It's like, well, those the other rich and powerful are their colleagues. Like, they just sit around and hang out with them.
And they have informal networks that exert a lot of influence and control, right? And again, I think that that had been pretty substantially upset by the internet era, because anyone could say anything online, and now they were getting that back by controlling the websites that people were using for distribution, right? Like that's what you really needed to do, because talking about like say Rumble, like I don't know if you've ever gone on Rumble, but it's kind of dog shit. Like it's not polished and it's not smooth because it doesn't have the same.
I find Odyssey is better, but yeah, like it's still, they're both inferior to YouTube for sure.
Well, by a mile. And
Daily Motion, now that's an inferior website.
Yeah.
It's no wonder like if you go and scratch down the surface of say something like Google has like a whole infrastructure department that has actually laid their own networking cables under the ocean. They have their own cables. They have obviously their own huge servers for YouTube. Like they have billions and billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure that undergird the experience on YouTube. Like the experience on YouTube shouldn't be really taken for granted, that you have like this incredibly responsive, smooth playback experience. And even like you can even go and compare it to something, another company like Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, and it's like even even with Amazon backing, Twitch is like miles behind YouTube, just because Google has done so much investment into something like YouTube, and people will only basically use the thing that's like the smoothest, most convenient, lowest friction method.
Well, they're not exactly what, to your whole point, right? It's like if you have one of the big players that decides to break away, like that's a huge deal. You can have 30 competitors, but like nobody's going to find out about the alternative narratives and like another way of thinking about things, because they're just not on the places where they're allowed.
Is there even a left-wing Twitter alternative yet?
The Mastodon. So there's actually some interesting stories. There was this. It's not even a website. It's like I'm not like a full techie, but it's just like a you can run your own servers basically, and they're like somehow connect. They can like interface with each other, so it's kind of like a distributed network. And apparently a lot of Twitter exiles that have been going on Mastodon have not been enjoying the experience. Like one of them was posting their experience and they were banned off of Mastodon because they were quote unquote a capitalist, and if they wanted to get access back to Mastodon, they could pay the server administrator in Monero crypto and we would have their account reinstated.
This sounds like a scam. Oh yeah, it's a peer distributed networking thing. Just sign up. You're gonna have to pay us in Monero though.
Well, I'm just saying, like, talk about friction. Like,
Yeah.
like
As
normal
soon as
people,
you say distributed network, it's like, yeah, this is going to be way over the heads of 99% of users.
and yeah, like it's not a viable
You know what's
alternative, right?
super?
So
You know what's?
look
I'm
at,
on Mastodon's main page right now, and it says social networking that's not for sale.
Well, again,
Given the
it's because it's
story you just gave.
private fiefdoms run by individual server owners, right? So
Yeah.
it's like if a server owner decides that they don't like you, they can ban you. And what are you going to do? It's not a website. There's no terms of service. It's just individually run servers that can do whatever they want. So again, like the problem is like getting any sort of momentum on a alternative forum going, and it's just not going to happen in this day and age. Like it just
I think the biggest illustration for that sort of stuff with like friction is just as simple as what's happened, like just torrent sites. Like torrenting, when in the aughts, in the good old days, used to be so common. And as soon as streaming became reasonable, the vast majority of people stopped torrenting.
Yeah.
And most people know, I say, oh, you should watch this series. And they say, oh, is that on Disney Plus? I don't have Disney Plus. I can't watch it. I'm just like, yeah, you can.
There is a method. We don't condone it, but it is available to you.
There's ways, but people just don't do it. Like
It's called
just
buying
not
the
worth
DVD.
it.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, Blu-rays.
Yeah. Get yourself
so
a PlayStation. Give her a go.
I don't know what that number is, but there has to be like enough people that actually use the website for people like for it to make an like meaningful cultural impact enough that it actually means anything.
Mhm.
And there's hardly any websites out there that I think hit that threshold, right? Like it's got to be tiny. It's got to be like maybe 5 or 6 social media networks that meet that, and none of the alternative ones do.
There's no evidence that Twitter's lost any users since Musk has come on. I've seen a few articles claiming that it's gained users.
Yeah,
But
I've only seen it like
You
comments.
know that if there's even a shred of evidence that the user base had declined, that the media would be all over it because they're looking for anything. And Twitter is not having any issues with the user base currently under Musk's lightened regime.
I found one where they're like, let me see. I think it was this Reuters one where they're like, oh, they're gonna start hemorrhaging users, and then it was the evidence that they provide was like one random ass account that said, I will be happy to leave in a heartbeat if Musk acts like we all expect him to. And it's like that was their evidence that people are gonna leave. Like I shit you not, that is the evidence that routers or whatever however
Reuters?
Reuters. I'm an idiot, so we'll just leave it as.
They're just not European enough.
Yeah, that was the evidence. Reuters.
Well, they're pretty lazy because the actual ones that I've seen that like tried to make that argument, they would just like point to like some like 50,000 follower celebrity that had left Twitter.
Then who's going to be on again in the next like 2 weeks? They slink back on, start tweeting again like nothing happened.
Well, that's like CBS. CBS announced that they were leaving Twitter out of security concerns, and then a day later they came back.
Jesus Christ!
I guess they cleared up the security concerns pretty quick once they realized
they're tank super hard.
Their interactions and their web views were taking a hit. Like,
well, it was like all the Americans who claimed that they were going to move to Canada if Trump won. It's like, okay.
Where they realized we're even more restrictive on immigration than they are.
Well, you have to actually bring something of value to Canada to immigrate. It's the biggest problem.
Well, no, technically speaking, 75% of our immigration numbers, I think, are now non-economic.
Well, they're family members of people who came. Like, you have to have like the whatever you want to call it, the spearhead has got to be someone useful for Canada.
Yeah.
Then he's allowed to bring over his wife and kids and
Yeah.
parents. But yeah, you're not allowed into Canada if you're not useful, and then like unless you're married or related to someone who is useful.
Exactly, and it's like I can't imagine the people who were saying that they're going to come to Canada if Trump won were useful themselves or related to anybody useful.
Well, I think getting back to like the main point is just like there does seem to be the main reason I think again that there's an online meltdown about Musk takeover is this insecurity about allowing one company to deviate from the accepted narrative and content moderation policies that have been put in place.
Yeah, I have
And,
a great quote that kind of sums that up, and it was from CNN when Musk first, like the Twitter deal first was accepted in April, and it was Media Matters, which is like a media watchdog. It was the president of Media Matters saying, "A sale to Elon Musk without any conditions will pollute the entire information ecosystem by opening up the floodgates of hate and lies." Basically just saying, if you allow any other voices than what have already been deemed acceptable, then you are dooming the world to misinformation and racists and bigots and Nazis to flood it all and completely destroy the information ecosystem and plunge the world into chaos. Like that.
So I wonder what we did without these watchdogs before. Like the world must have just been run by Nazis for all of human history until now. It's a miracle the watchdogs ever came into power.
Till we had journalist fact checkers. That's when, that's
That's
the
when
true anti-fascist movement. Forget, the boys on the beach in World War II. It's,
it's the fucking verified Twitter journalists.
It's the they thems at Twitter that are just cranking out the hours at canceling hate speech. I mean, not many hours, like 2 per day, but they are putting in the hours.
And their free breakfast and lunch.
Well, and their massage, their company provided massage, and their therapy sessions.
I was going to say copious amounts of therapy sessions where they all cry together.
I think. Do you guys have like more to add on the political angle of the backlash, or should we?
No, that's it for me. Unless Price has some.
No, that's about all.
That was like I think the generally accepted reason that there was such a big backlash, and that's what I think that's like a lot of the conservative media and conservative, I guess you'd call them talking heads. That's the angle I think they kind of went with the Musk takeovers. Like see like the Twitter and all these social media platforms have been repressing conservative voices, and they're really mad that Musk is taking over because he's going to just bring things back to balance where conservative voices are allowed back on the platform. And again, like we just discussed, I think there's like pretty good merit to that argument, and to a degree where they have been skewing the narrative in their favor, and
you can see actions being taken on that by Musk. Like he's already reinstated multiple people who were banned for pretty stupid reasons, like including people like Jordan Peterson and some others, who were forced out because they didn't go with
what's that Veritas or whatever?
Yeah, Project Veritas.
I think they're back on too. Like,
yeah,
and
Babylon Bee as well.
And like they're not like mainstream conservative voices. I wouldn't say they're kind of like they're a bit outside the mainstream, like the Veritas and stuff.
They have a pretty big impact though.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying like they're not part of, I would say, like the kind of establishment conservative types who probably are also a little worried about Musk taking over. And but again, like that political argument again has merit, and I think is playing out. But I think the other angle that is worth examining. It's just like the generalized insecurity that this Musk's move has made, where it for basically like the whole the term I've heard thrown around is surplus elites, which is just like the big chunk of people that work in tech and media and other cushy white collar jobs that don't really necessarily need to exist and don't really add value to the company. And the problem with for them with the Musk takeover is if he cuts 75% of the staff and the company goes
50%.
from and the company goes, well, he's probably going to hit 75, 80 because between contractors and employees.
Yeah, that's true. I wasn't even looking at the contractors.
About is he's I think he's also turfed like over 4,000 contractors or something. But anyway, like the general point being, like, if Musk is able to come in, massively cut down headcount, and then the company stays functional and keeps running and actually starts making a lot more money because they just cut their costs by a massive amount, then other companies, especially in this, like we discussed at the beginning of the podcast, in this like economically uncertain, pretty, scary time in history, other companies might look around and go like, oh wow, like Musk at a tech company was just able to yeet all these people and still make money and still run the company just fine. Are there any maybe redundant positions at our company? Do we really need this like huge bloated, say, advertising relations division, or this sales division, or this diversity and inclusion division? Like, are all of these jobs really necessary? Are they really adding value to our customer? Or to our customers and to our core business? Are they really bringing profit in and returning value to shareholders? Like, maybe we could start looking at all this.
First, we'll get the free lunch.
Well, and I think it's,
Bryce,
if you
have
are
an obsession with the free lunch. Would you like a free lunch?
So I just love the free lunch.
You just want free lunches again. Go back to camp. Get free lunch.
Yeah, if you are one of the people that's maybe working a pretty cushy, non-technical role at any of these companies, you could see being very insecure. Like, you might be taking a long, hard look at your job and going like, oh boy, like, what do I really do here? And yeah, you might lash out at the person that is precipitating a mass firing in your industry.
It's kind of interesting. Like, I can say, like, within my own industry, which is completely unrelated to tech, but in preparation for a recession, like my company, a multi-billion-dollar company, I'm a part of the budgeting and whatnot, and we're looking at like a lot of the departments as well, because we got orders from on high, because we're a part of a mega conglomerate, and like we're looking at a bunch of redundant shit, and we found a bunch of it, and the company has decided to axe it. And so, yeah, I just think but especially for tech like that, yeah, it's a huge shakeup. I think, given because my type of company has been around for God knows how long, like literally thousands of years, but like in terms of like what we actually do, but it doesn't seem like tech has ever really truly in the last 15 years gone through this, like we were saying before, and to have that come as like all of a sudden, and have somebody, especially somebody like Musk, who is not going to be polite about it, and he's going to advertise it basically across the whole world, saying like, look how I've done. I've axed all this shit. We're making more money now. Like, what the hell was Twitter doing here? Like this, like before I came on board, like this is ridiculous. Like, what a joke. Yeah, I could see that being extremely unsettling to the industry as a whole. I would say, like, bringing it back to what I was saying before, it's like other industries have already kind of seen that. They've already gone through probably multiple cycles of this, but for tech, it's new or newish.
One of the arguments I would see in some of these articles that was presented was basically that tech is special, and specifically social media is special, and it runs on fairy dust and prayers, and that Musk just doesn't have a handle on this fairy dust and prayers, and therefore is just not going to be able to make it work. And basically what they're saying is that Musk looks at the problems, or looks at what the company's doing and asks why, and tries to go back to first principles. He doesn't just stick with the established narrative, and they're projecting that because he's not sticking with the way every other social media or tech company does these things, that it's not going to succeed. So
that's exactly what he's told about
Tesla. There's no evidence that it's not going to succeed, but they're hoping that it doesn't because it directly affects them, as we're saying.
Which is funny because that's what he was told about Tesla and SpaceX. You know, like,
and presumably with somebody who's doubting him about PayPal, but he wasn't famous enough for it to be widespread at that time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like each time he's come into something. Now, it's not to say that he will succeed, like it's a guarantee. Like, obviously not. Nothing's guaranteed. But I do find it very interesting and, frankly, ridiculous that people would be like, say like, oh, well, you know, because you're not doing it the way that all the other ones are doing it, you're dead in the water. It's like, that's usually how things change. Is somebody comes and starts doing it a different way, and then they revolutionize it, and then they keep going. That was the definition of like the tech industry. Like that's what it was, is disruptor. And it's very funny that they've kind of gotten into this. No, they're just fallen victim to like the same shitty thinking that everybody does.
Cushy gig.
Sorry?
It's like everyone's got a lot of money and a cushy gig. Nobody wants to stop the party. Musk came in and stopped the party.
Well, and like I think we mentioned earlier, I mean, he was just like he's just going the hardest and the most severe, right? Like other companies are kind of trimming back staff and already looking at, you know, more layoffs, et cetera, et cetera. He just went like hardcore. Like no other company has laid off, you know, 50% plus, and no other company, I think in another like big departure that Musk has done in terms of like with his reorganization or Twitter 2.0 or whatever the fuck he's calling it, is like the pledge, the ultimatum thing he sent out, like going back to working these long hours or expecting that you should be okay with working long hours if needed, kind of like, you know. And I'm just listening to like some podcasts in the tech sphere and stuff. It seems like he's going back to like a startup mentality that was very prevalent in Silicon Valley, say a decade ago, where it's just expected that at minimum you're working 60 hours a week at any of these jobs, and your work-life balance is not going to be particularly good, and you're just going to be more or less dedicated to the job and grinding it out, kind of hustle culture type shit, right? And you know, I can see people like at Twitter like not wanting any part of that, but I think Musk was very reasonable in offering them all a way out. Anyone who didn't want to keep working there was given double the minimum severance and said, okay, here's your severance. You don't have to keep working here. If this isn't your jam, you don't want to do the grinding hours and the hard work, and you just want something cushy, feel free to go look for that someplace else. Here's a nice little, you know, check. See ya. And to me, like the fact that not a single like media company is picking up on that and being like, oh, what a reasonable way to approach things. Like he wants a complete, you know, culture overhaul. So he's being completely transparent and upfront about it and saying, listen, we're completely changing the culture. The culture here is not what I wanted for my company. If you don't like it, here's a fat paycheck for you to basically fuck off and go pursue your passion somewhere else.
And what's interesting is like that's how he runs his other companies. Like working at, like one of my friends worked at Tesla, and SpaceX are both pretty notorious for rough work cultures in terms of like the amount of work that you have to do. It's not like a god awful hellscape to work there, but it certainly, like some of these magnets, like Musk, Bezos as well. Like that's the culture in the places that they run, and yeah, he is giving people a fair way out, and yeah, I have to agree. It's very odd that that's not picked up on, but again, it just you cannot tell, you cannot put out any sort of messaging that Musk is in any way doing the right thing or even an okay thing. It's all got to be along the lines of he's a complete moron who's running Twitter into the ground and is also dangerous.
Well, again, like kind of almost in parallel with the whole political conversation where we were saying, if one company breaks ranks, it's a big problem for all the other companies because and all the other people, because then there's this exception that will completely undermine the narrative. I think there is, again, part of the surplus elites insecurity about this is that you can't have a big tech company do such a public about face on work culture and compensation and hiring practices and all this stuff, because if it works for them, then every other company is going to get ideas, right? And you could definitely see over the next few years kind of a divide happen in Silicon Valley where some companies choose to go like a return to principles, a return to basics, grind it out, hustle culture mentality. We're going to only hire people that add value. We're only going to, and everyone's expected to work and contribute and, perform. And if they don't, they're out the door, no questions asked. And other companies might stay with their kind of, lifestyle supporting work-life balance, supporting easy come, easy go attitude. And we'll just see how it plays out. Like, I think that's, I think it is telling how like worried a lot of these workers seem that about this experiment playing out. Like, I mean, if the Twitter model is so worthless, like the Musk Twitter model is so worthless and unsustainable and broken, then they should be happy. Like they should be celebrating that Musk took over, because it's like what he's going to run the company into the ground. It's going to all fall apart. Everyone's going to, quit, and he's going to have 0 employees left, and everything will just fail on its own. And then every company will be reminded how valuable these, having tons of employees is, and giving them all the benefits that they, quote unquote deserve. And there you go. It's proofs in the pudding, and Musk's failure will be the employees' gain, and Google will have no choice but to, keep paying their average median employee $300K, and, business as usual. So I think the fact that they're not so excited about the experiment is telling of like where a lot of the attitude is.
It kind of shows that they view it as like an actual threat, that they know that there might be something to what he's doing, that there's a good chance that it's going to go through and potentially and work.
There's got to be something in the back of their minds, because you look at other industries that aren't tech, and this sort of thing is not uncommon. I know energy industry being what I'm most exposed to. They'll just hire a guy to come in and cut the fat, and that's half your employees in the office gone. And then that wasn't enough. 2 years later, they get another guy to fire another half. So you're down to 25% of the people you had 2 years ago, and you're doing the same amount of work. And like, that's just how other industries trim the fat, and tech has never gone that hard. Like, it's a real concern that tech is going to go the way that maybe not every other industry, but other industries do similar sort of cuts.
Well, and I do think it's just a little like the employees are just pretty spoiled, right? Like the fact that they are so concerned that they might have to work overtime and weekends, like, and it's like, again, these people are most of them are getting compensated 6 figures and well into the 6 figures, right? Like they're making 100, 2, 3.
Median for
300,000 a
Twitter is
year.
150,000.
Yeah, and I'm sure like your average, coder or whatever that's going to be expected to be in the office to put in your 60-hour work week is going to be higher than that, right? Higher than the median. And so they're making good money, right? And it's just like there's so many other jobs out there that expect you to work longer than an 8-hour shift, expect you to work overtime, expect you to work on weekends, expect you to do all these sacrifices, and they
And
don't
get paid
pay.
way less. Yeah, I used
Yeah,
to do that
it's like
all day long for
nurses,
3 years.
and it's like Jesus Christ, like this is like you're being asked to do something that tons of other people in other industries already do, and if you don't want to, you're also being given a perfectly reasonable option to get a nice little payday and leave. Like,
It makes you wonder how conscious a lot of these employees are of their circumstances, because it seems wild to me how many employees have voluntarily left given the environment in tech right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it's got to be so hard to find a job right now in tech, and yet you had roughly 2,000 employees voluntarily quit from Twitter.
I would say generally, I think a lot of people in these circumstances, they don't really, like, they think they're kind of normal people despite
That's
being
the best
in
part
the
of all
elite.
this.
Like, they're truly in the elite. Like, I have friends who think that way. They are actually high paid, high skilled tech workers who went to some of the best universities in the world, and they thought they were like, they just thought they were completely normal, average Canadian or Americans. It's like, it baffled me. It's like, you're in the elite of the elite. Like, you are like programmers and engineers for, like, extremely high valued companies, and you went to some of the most elite institutions in the world. Like, you're not even remotely close to a normal human being. Like, you truly are in, well, they wouldn't be quite 1%, but like 5%, top 5% of like wage earners, intelligence, all of that. And it's just like
if you're making 150 grand or 300 grand at a tech, you're well above 5%.
But the people that I was talking to, they weren't in the 300K area,
America,
but they were getting up. They like 150 type area. It's like you're 120 to 150. It's like you're not anything like a normal human being. Like, go talk to the cashier at Wendy's. That's like your average Canadian. Like,
America's just 10% is 125,000 and up.
Sorry?
So almost all 125,000 and up puts you in the top 10% in America. So almost all Twitter employees are in the top 10%.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's probably household income too, not individual.
This claims to be individual, but I'm not fact checking it that deeply. So
yeah, it's like to me, I think a lot of the people from, like, obviously I was just using personal experience, which is not, full proof of anything, but like, it was, I think a lot of them do kind of, they just aren't aware of their situation at all.
Well, I think that's part of it. I also think maybe part of it is just like, if you were making good money for the last 10 years and then you were offered on top of that a severance package, you might not need to desperately find work again in the next year.
Yeah, that's true. You might be able to just chill and do something else.
You might just be able to chill. I don't think the tech recession is going to be forever. So,
but people I could really understand are anybody who moved out of San Francisco and into a much cheaper place and then did not want to ever possibly have to return to the office.
Yeah,
that's true too. It's like
a
if
reasonable choice, especially if you had saved money. Yeah, I wouldn't be going.
Saved up, bought a house outright in cash in some small town or smaller city. It's like, you don't need to work. Like, why would you? And again, like, I think that all the more speaks to like that being a reasonable decision by Musk to put in front of people, right? It's like, if you don't want to come into the office, I think he lamented a little bit on the remote stuff, and he said if you're essential or your performance is deemed at a high enough level or whatever, you don't have to come into
Basically,
the
a
office
manager has to vouch for you doing good work from home.
and being necessary. And I think he still does want even those people to potentially come in once a month or some shit
Yeah.
for meetings. But regardless, yeah, like if you don't want to come in or if you've moved halfway across the country, yeah, then fine. Like, and you're in a low cost of living area, like, yeah, why not? Just take the money and run it. And again, like, tech isn't gonna be dead forever. I think it's gonna come back to life after the recession in a big way. So if you can ride out the next year or two, you're more than fine. But I do think I don't think it's necessarily like your engineer or your coder or your technically skilled person that is sweating and should have stayed. Like, I think those people are the ones that are going to be fine and will find pretty easy employment in the next year or two. I do think there's going to be like a lot of the soft skills, quote unquote skills, and just non-technical roles in tech that are not going to may never be replaced in the same numbers that they were at currently. I think those might be forever gone jobs.
Well, yeah, if they are very low value add and the companies from this experience, if it does bear out that you can remove them and not damage anything whatsoever and maybe even see some improvements, why would you ever reinstate them? Like, that is one of the weird things, because I've worked in some very large businesses and been privy to like the way that they function, and I just like they would have like huge departments and all of this additional spending on shit that there was no way it was enabling them to do the things that they actually, brought in the revenue. Like, it's just no way that it made any money and only lost it. And I think, man, axing that and dumping that back into doing what you like, brings home the bacon. I think as a company, if you experience that, why would you ever go back to that old way, like pissing away money on shit that doesn't help you?
Well, I think it's just not going to be an option, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think beyond just like it being demonstrated that it's a waste of money, the fact that I don't think there's going to be nearly the same amount of money to waste in the next decade, even when things say we go through, I mean, this is getting out on a limb here a bit, but I think there's going to be an economic downturn of some degree, yeah, in the next year or two. And I also predict that we're not going to go back to the 2020, 2021, zero interest rate, billions and billions and billions of dollars getting loaned out by the government for free and not having to be, loan forgiveness and all this. Like, I just don't think we're ever going to see the same type of like free money situation come up in the foreseeable future in the medium term. Like, you're just not going to see that. So companies just won't have the type of money to throw around like they were in the last few years on stupid shit. There's just not going to be that type of money in the system, and belts are going to have to get tightened around the whole economy. And again, a lot of those jobs I just don't think are coming back.
I think the way I view it is kind of as though Musk sees that sort of future, and he's basically compressing Twitter's adaptation to that future into as short a time as possible. And like, if he does end up failing Twitter, like all the pundits say, then I mean, Twitter was already looking rough, like most tech companies were, and maybe it would have failed anyway. It just failed faster with Musk. And if he saves Twitter, like, maybe they could have saved it anyway, but they saved it faster with Musk. Like, you're going at a breakneck speed by what it seems like in terms of adapting to this reality that he sees on the horizon.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, is because Twitter's financial situation was nowhere near as strong as a lot of the other tech companies. So they kind of they needed to go hard in the paint, right? Like
They were looking over their financials. It was rough. Like they were hemorrhaging money.
I mean, they were no Carvana, but they were pretty bad. That could be a whole topic for another podcast.
Which one?
Carvana, it's like the what is that? What was that company that was buying houses and flipping them, trying to make money? Was it not Zillow or
I heard of them. I think.
Estimates or I can't remember. There's
yeah.
But anyway, Carvana was the same thing, but for cars. So they would buy your car and then they would sell it, and they would try to make, a profit on the flip. And turns out that having, 17-year-old high school students vet the cars by just looking at them to make sure they weren't literally on fire at the time of purchase. It was hard to gather enough information about the vehicle to make a profit on the resale.
That makes sense. Yeah, they didn't have proper inspectors because that would cost too much.
Yeah, it was just
Genius.
difficult. The tech wasn't there yet, I don't think. And
They didn't have an AI, a deep learning AI that could just look at the car and figure it out yet. Shame.
exactly, they were trying to do it based on like model year and all that stuff, but it turns out that's not granular enough for car market. Obviously,
Surprising.
Cars of different years can be or cars from the same year and the same make and the same model can be worth drastically different amounts of money depending on whether or not the owner blew out the fucking transmission. So, but yeah. Do you guys have more to add on the surplus elites front of things, of this whole group cadre of useless employees getting unmasked by Musk?
All I want to say is, so with regards to them having a bad self-image, you see it repeatedly in any sort of Twitter thread on the topic, that people are basically describing this as the billionaires crushing the proletariat under the boot. And it's like, well, I mean, if the proles are the top 10% of the population, I don't want to know who the bottom 90% are. It's just,
Those are the
they're trying to
expendables.
describe it as this
true
class
expendables.
struggle against Musk and a socialist framework. And it's like, this is the rich and the richer. It's not the poor working class being put
Well,
upon.
I think the Trump election really showcased how little what would be like the managerial class cares about the actual poor and working class. It's just they don't give a rat's ass and they view them as like disposable.
Well,
Just to use them in theory in terms of like their backing or in terms of their like political clout.
and I mean, yeah, talking about the managerial class, like that's kind of how some people have been viewing it, as just the managerial class in tech companies have gotten a bit too powerful, and that's part of the reason that the whole surplus elites exist. Is you have a department, and all as a manager, you never want to be contracting your headcount under you. You want to always be expanding. It gives you prestige, gives you power. And in a tech company, a lot of the time the compensation isn't based on profit, it's based on shares. So as long as the share price is doing fine, you don't really care if adding a bunch of employees actually hurts the profitability of your company. Your compensation is not going to be linked to that anyway. So if adding a bunch of useless employees doesn't hurt your income, and it just makes you look better because you get to brag to your buddy that, oh yeah, I got 3,500 people under me working under me. I'm a big shot. I got 3 layers of managers under me. I'm a big deal. Then why wouldn't you keep hiring? It just there's no disincentive until the stockholders come knocking and say, what the fuck are you guys doing? like we're losing money, or our financial situation is getting precarious, and that's what's happening right now, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all coming in on itself, and
Or even worse, one shareholder buys your company.
exactly, and that one shareholder doesn't want to lose money, $4 million a day anymore,
Yeah.
and decides that things need to change. It's the managerial class is getting reined in.
It will be a very interesting next couple of months to watch. That's for sure.
Well, the other thing that's crazy about this has been about 3 weeks. It's like
Yeah.
plenty of time to proclaim the death of Twitter. 3 weeks.
Oh, and plenty of time to assess Musk's, managerial
performance.
talent, his vision for the app. Like everything has been entirely determined after 3 weeks. Apparently, it's just all clear.
Well, those early leaks of Twitter 2.0 to the insiders of the press, Musk just likes them too much and just let it slip, and they know it's not going to work out.
Yeah, it's just there's no new information or no new developments that could possibly influence the outcome. It's all written in stone. Nothing to see here.
Well, that just about does it for me. Do you guys have anything else?
I think that's good.
Yeah,
All
that
right.
seems good.
Thanks for listening. Peace.
Peace.